Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, September 6th. And tonight, the manhunt continues in Saskatchewan for one of two suspects in a deadly stabbing rampage. Indigenous leaders in Saskatchewan are begging anyone with information on the whereabouts of Miles Sanderson to come forward. The 30-year-old is the only remaining suspect in a stabbing rampage that left 10 people dead and 18 injured over the weekend. The body of the other suspect, Mr. Sanderson's 31-year-old brother Damien, was found yesterday. RCMP in Saskatchewan earlier reported a possible sighting of the suspect in and around the James Smith Cree Nation. However, they now say that the suspect is not there and remains at large. All right, well, meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his cabinet are in Vancouver today. They are meeting for the start of a 3-day retreat. This comes as they prepare for a fall sitting of Parliament, where they will face a new Conservative leader. The Liberals have just a few months left to deliver on a promise to the NDP, which was part of the confidence and supply agreement between the two parties. It includes national dental care and an expanded housing benefit. Both are expected by Christmas. Well, as the Conservative Party prepares to welcome a new leader this week, its interim leader says she won't be running in the next federal election. Candice Bergen took over the role of interim opposition leader after Erin O'Toole was ousted by the Conservative caucus in February. Ms. Bergen says she will stay on as a member of Parliament in the immediate future, and she will support whoever is chosen as the party's new leader. All right, well, this comes as the provincial election campaign continues in Quebec, where François Legault is tackling the issue of sustainable electricity and carbon neutrality. He says a re-elected Coalition Avenir Quebec government would ask the province's power utility to consider building new hydroelectric projects. Mr. Legault says Hydro-Quebec should start the necessary studies as soon as possible because the design and construction of a dam can take up to 15 years. Mr. Legault is counting on increasing electrification as part of his environmental plan, which includes achieving carbon neutrality by 2050. Well, it's back to school, and students across much of Ontario are returning to the classroom today. It will be the first start of a school year without COVID-19 restrictions since the pandemic began. The province's education minister has stressed the need for a return to what he calls the full student experience this year. Now, that means that students will be able to attend class without wearing a mask, and in-person lessons will trump remote options. Children will also have access to extracurricular activities for the first time since the start of the pandemic. Back on the West Coast, advocates who deliver overdose education in BC schools are pushing to make the information more accessible. They are calling on the provincial government to make the information a mandatory part of the high school curriculum. Among them is Simon Fraser University student Chloe Goodison. She founded the group Naloxone Home, which teaches students how to recognize an overdose and use naloxone to potentially save someone's life. Ms. Goodison was inspired to start the group and study health sciences after witnessing a teenage girl overdose. This was while she was on a commuter train in Vancouver 5 years ago. 2 of the 8 workers injured in a refinery explosion in Newfoundland have been released from hospital. And the facility's owner says construction work at the site will be halted until September 12th. Brea Renewable Fuels says it will resume work at the Come By Chance refinery after it is assessed by its Occupational Health and Safety Division next week. The cause of Friday's explosion and subsequent fire at the refinery is under investigation. Moving to Alberta now, where a Northern First Nation has filed a lawsuit similar to one that was seen in BC. It claims that cumulative impacts from industry, agriculture, and settlement are so pervasive that they violate the band's treaty rights. Duncan's First Nation alleges that band members can only live their constitutionally guaranteed way of life with great difficulty. Observers say the case uses arguments similar to those successfully advanced by a British Columbia band. Now, that case resulted in a court ruling that paused industrial permits in BC's northeast. Taking a look at a new report from Equifax Canada now, which says Canadian credit card balances in the second quarter rose to the highest level since the fourth quarter of 2019. A report by the credit rating agency says non-mortgage debt was up 5.2% from a year ago to $591.4 billion. This was due in part to higher spending linked to inflation. Equifax says overall debt, including mortgages, was up 8.2% to $2.32 trillion. Stay with us. Forum Daily will be right back. And when we return, we're going to take a look at a new UN report on China. Stay with us. The United Nations is accusing China of serious human rights violations. This comes in a long-awaited report examining the crackdown on Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups. Human rights groups have accused Beijing of sweeping 1 million or more people from the minority groups into detention camps. This is where many have said they were tortured or sexually assaulted. The UN Human Rights Report adds the weight of the world body to conclusions from advocacy groups and media outlets. But it's not clear what impact it will have. China has denounced the assessment as a fabrication cooked up by Western nations. Well, joining us now to unpack the report and its impact is Dr. Charles Burton, an expert on China and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Burton, welcome back to Forum Daily.
It's good to speak with you, Nima.
Now, unfortunately, human rights abuses in Xinjiang have already been brought to light by advocates and journalists, including Forum Daily. So what would you say is the significance of this UN report?
Well, in addition to advocates and so on, the Parliament of Canada passed a unanimous resolution that what's going on with the Uyghurs does constitute genocide under the UN Convention on Genocide, which Canada and China are both ratified. So I do think that having the UN sanction on the idea that what China is doing in Xinjiang violates a wide range of international law, not just the Convention on Genocide, but the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention Against Torture, and so on, does make it clear to China and the international community that what China is doing is simply completely unacceptable to the world and requires further investigation. The UN has not been able to determine whether what China's doing amounts to genocide, but they really need more information and China to be more forthcoming and allowing more access for UN special rapporteurs and other UN agencies to get in there and verify what's going on, and for China to respond to the international community's concerns and release those Uyghurs from the concentration camps, which the UN has verified are true because they see the satellite evidence and have other sources of information that suggest that the Chinese government is not being honest about their program of trying to eliminate the Uyghur culture, civilization, and language and religion.
And was there any new information revealed in this report compared to what we already know from human rights advocacy groups and journalists?
Well, I think the main thing is the analysis and the statement by the UN that even if China is concerned about the potential of Uyghurs participating in terrorist activities in China and other parts of the world, that it's unacceptable for China to suppress the religious rights of the Uyghurs just because they feel if they get them to cease their belief in Islam, that they will then no longer be inclined to support terrorist causes. And I think it's pretty clear to the rest of the world outside China that there is not an issue of pervasive terrorist activity among the Uyghur minority. What they mostly want is their language, culture, and cultural rights, and the right to political representation. And China wants to suppress any notion that the Uyghurs are unhappy with being ruled by another ethnic group from a capital very far away. After all, Kashgar in Xinjiang is closer to Budapest than it is to Beijing.
All right, Dr. Burton, about a minute left here, but we know China has denounced this report as a fabrication. But what do we know so far about how the report is being perceived by the general public within China and their sentiments around all of this?
Well, China has described it, the foreign ministry spokesman says it's completely illegal and void, and proves once again that the OHCHR, the UN Human Rights Commission, has become a thug and accomplice of the US and the West. Well, I mean, this is complete and utter nonsense. That, the integrity of the UN process and their rigorous legality is well established. But people in China, because of the suppression of the internet and the flow of information into China, will not be aware of this report or its contents.
All right, lots to keep our eyes on as this situation develops. Dr. Burton, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
Stay with us. We'll be right back after the break with a look at heading back to school. Wyatt Sharpe joins us again on Forum Daily with his take on what students may be dealing with as many school boards return to in-person classes. And of course, after that, we'll have major news stories and headlines from around the world. So stay with us. Forum Daily, we'll be right back in a moment. Students in several school boards are back in classrooms today as a new academic year begins. But this time, it'll look a lot different than last year. Many schools are opening without COVID-19 restrictions for the first time since the pandemic began. This comes as advocates are raising concerns around a potential resurgence of COVID cases as kids get closer during in-person classes. Meanwhile, students are being encouraged to be kinder to each other and avoid bullying following 2 years of online learning and a potential lack of socialization during that time. But how are students themselves feeling as they return to what some would say is normal school life? Well, joining us now to tell us about his experience is Wyatt Sharpe, journalist and show host. Wyatt, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me, Nima. It's great to be back.
So let's start with your own personal experience, Wyatt. How was your learning affected during the pandemic?
Well, first of all, let me just say once again, thank you very much for having me back here on Forum Daily and on the News Forum Network. I think my experience has been relatively similar to the students across the province of Ontario. It hasn't been ideal for anyone. It's been really a matter of how have I and all of my peers here in Ontario been able to adjust to the current circumstances. As you said, this is really one of the first school years throughout the pandemic when we are going back to school without any restrictions. There's obviously mixed feelings about that. There's some people who say maybe more concerned with their safety because of that. And then there's some people who are now looking at the current circumstances and they're kind of, they are, I guess, more relieved in a certain sense to be able to know that they don't have to have these restrictions. They don't have to wear a mask when going to school. But again, there is still that safety concern. I personally, wear a mask on, certain occasions when it feels right. Maybe when you're outside for recess, say, don't wear a mask, get outside, enjoy the time, and then go back inside, maybe put a mask back on. Just really, I think it really comes down to knowing the circumstances when it's appropriate. Definitely put a mask on. It's going to help yourself, it's going to help your peers, and will make for a safer environment.
So tell us a little bit more about how students are feeling themselves, Wyatt. Is COVID-19 still a concern for students, or is this more of a concern for adults and parents right now?
I personally would say that it is something that I'm thinking about. It's something that I know a lot of my peers are thinking about, especially at my age, going into grade 8, being 13. It's something that, we've heard about constantly. It's not just going to all of a sudden go away. It's an issue that COVID-19 has, really had an impact on the lives of students, educators, parents, etc. So it really is an issue that, it's not going to go from, being an issue that you hear about on a day-to-day basis to not at all. I personally am still concerned with COVID-19, seeing how relevant it is in various communities across the province, across the country. But again, knowing the circumstances, knowing that, some safety precautions have been taken this year, obviously not as many as in years past. So again, really an issue I think that is still very relevant on the minds of students, and then of course educators and parents as well.
All right, switching gears, Wyatt, we mentioned a lot of attention is being drawn to the issue of bullying. So how do you think the pandemic impacted bullying in schools?
I think I would personally say that it really is something that obviously a lot of people face. It's very unfortunate. Some people, maybe you could say, who choose to wear a mask may not be really welcomed with their decision to wear a mask, especially now that a lot of those mask mandates are lifted. You're no longer required to wear a face covering in school. There's obviously a lot of students who still choose to, and they need to be accepted for their choice, accepted for deciding to wear a mask. I've seen personally with some of my peers at school who choose to wear a mask, even myself, not necessarily you could say bullying, but there are sometimes comments you could say made about wearing a mask. Like I said, I personally look at those circumstances. I look at how it might be appropriate, listening to the advice of, public health experts, listening to the advice of, say, what your teachers might be saying, whether or not they feel it's appropriate to wear a mask. So again, looking at some of those precautions that have been taken, everyone has the right to make their own decision, whether that's wearing a mask, whether that's taking any other perhaps additional safety precautions. And for myself, wearing a mask again, sometimes, maybe not at other times. Obviously, it's a very different school year than in years past. But I would say definitely from the experience at my school that I currently go to, and et cetera, that I think that it really, people have been welcomed. Obviously, I know that's not the experience of a lot of schools across the province or across the country, but I mean, where I currently attend school, a lot of people are being welcomed in there, whether or not they decide to wear a mask, whether or not they decide not to wear a mask.
The UK has a new Prime Minister. Liz Truss has taken the post, replacing Boris Johnson. Each had an audience with the Queen this morning to make the transition official. This comes after members of the governing Conservatives handed Ms. Truss the party leadership over the weekend. Speaking outside 10 Downing Street, Ms. Truss vowed to tackle the issues that are holding Britain back. She said she would focus on tackling Britain's energy crisis, struggling economy, and overburdened health service. Meanwhile, fears are mounting over Europe's largest nuclear power plant as shelling around it continues. The United Nations Atomic Watchdog Agency is urging Russia and Ukraine to establish a nuclear safety and security protection zone around the Zaporizhzhia power plant. The International Atomic Energy Agency says shelling in and around the nuclear facility needs to stop immediately. There are mounting concerns that the fighting could trigger a catastrophe in a country still haunted by the Chernobyl disaster. All right, well, this comes as the European Commissioner for Energy says the EU's next moves to address the energy crisis are expected to be unveiled next week. The continent's worsening energy crisis following Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a top concern amid record-breaking electricity prices. Many European countries have tightened their belts because of this. Russia's state-run energy company has continued its shutdown of a pipeline carrying natural gas to Europe. And the European Commission president says the EU's electricity market is no longer operating amid knock-on effects from the Ukraine war. Turning to the U.S. now, where a judge has granted a request by former President Donald Trump's lawyers amid the Mar-a-Lago investigation. It will appoint a special master to review documents seized during a search of Mr. Trump's Florida home last month. The decision by U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon came despite the objections of the Justice Department. The appointment may slow the pace of the department's investigation into the presence of top-secret information at Mar-a-Lago. It's not clear whether it will affect any investigative decisions or the ultimate outcome of the probe. Tensions rise in Taiwan, where the president says China is conducting cognitive warfare against the self-ruled island. This by spreading misinformation, in addition to its regular incursions into nearby waters and airspace. Experts have warned that China has made substantial inroads within Taiwanese mass media. They say it could plant false narratives in social media and elsewhere to erode military morale and public confidence. Well, violence continues to plague the Sahel region, where a suspected jihadi roadside bomb has hit a convoy in northern Burkina Faso. It has killed at least 35 people and injured dozens more. The governor of Sahel region said that a supply convoy escorted by the army was hit with one of the vehicles carrying civilians. He said the wounded have been evacuated and the area of the explosion has been secured. No group immediately claimed responsibility. Burkina Faso has been ravaged by violence linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State group, in which thousands have been killed. Moving to the Chinese city of Chengdu, where authorities are maintaining strict COVID-19 lockdown measures, even in the face of a major earthquake. It killed at least 65 people in outlying areas. Footage circulating online shows workers wearing top-to-bottom protective gear. They were preventing residents of apartment buildings from exiting through locked lobby doors. Buildings in Chengdu and other parts of western China were shaken by yesterday's 6.8 magnitude quake, which was centered in the surrounding province of Sichuan. Now, despite only recording a handful of cases, Chengdu's lockdown is among the most severe in China. All right, turning back to the U.S., where a brutal heat wave continues to blanket California, with temperatures in the mid-40s Celsius. Energy officials in the state say rolling blackouts are a possibility as people crank up the air conditioning. California's energy grid runs on a mix of mostly solar and natural gas during the day, but solar power begins to fall off during the late afternoon and into the evening. That is the hottest time of day in some parts of the state. The former Irish president has called on African nations to pile on the pressure on rich, heavily polluting countries, this to fulfill their climate pledges to the continent. Mary Robinson is also chair of the Elders Group of global leaders who advocate for peace and justice. She told the Associated Press on Monday that the Group of 20 must come up with new plans to support Africa with its climate change efforts at COP27. The upcoming United Nations Climate Conference is scheduled for November. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on social media on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also watch all of our commentary programming and interviews on the News Forum YouTube channel. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.